Hi, this is from Level Up, and this is for Paolo Siega. He wanted some critiques and comments on his work, so I'm going to do it for him. All right, so the first foremost thing, the face is pretty good. You gave me you gave some reference, which is good. The only thing that I see really, even though you said you didn't stick too much with the reference, the only thing that I see is that the um, the shoulders really are um, they're too wide. So in all reality, what you would do is you would pull these down like so, like this, and it's much more of a bump, and then it's more of a downward slope. And I think that's going to really push out that corner. And then on this one, I think the shoulder starts higher up, like so, and then it comes down here and um, like this. So, and I think thinning that out is going to help your reference out. The face is pretty good. I did notice there's a little angle on the cheek. I would put a little bit more angle on the cheek, um, like that. But overall, it's not a bad start. The one thing that I would tell you to do um, is I would actually, you commented really more about the brushes, and so I want to kind of get in there and I'm going to show you the how to how to really manipulate the brushes. All right, so when you're working with your basic brushes, so I'm just going to go. I always keep my pressure sensitivity on, and that's just the way I started doing digital painting. So I um, with my transfer and or my opacity and flow jitter on, I always you can always use a smooth brush when you're doing this. Now, when you're using the smooth brush, and I'm going to just keep your white out real quick here, um, you can go from really, really soft smooth and blend up your soft edges like so. And if your spacing is far apart, you're going to get these steps um, when you do your digital painting. You're going to get these uh, more like this when you do a digital painting, and that's going to give you a little bit of texture in the particular piece, but it's not going to give you a lot. And it's good to start doing something like that when you're looking at this area here. Like if you want to stylize this with the colors, start going a little bit bigger and getting that color in earlier. All right, and that'll give you a much wider range of color. But you said that you work with hard brushes and you didn't know how to get that smoothing effect in it. Well, the hard brush, and I like starting out with the chalk brush. It's just a brush that I like. It has hard edges here and hard edges there. Um, but if you change the opacity and flow on it, something along the lines of I don't know. I actually have a hotkey set up for it. That's 8456 or 54, roughly 80s. That's going to give you a kind of a blend that you can kind of. It gives you that texture in it, and it still gives you, you can build up your lights and darks, and that's really how you kind of work through that process. So that being said, what I would do in this, and don't be afraid to use the lasso either. So in this example, like here, her jawline, I'm gonna kind of lasso out her jawline, bring this down and I'm just doing a big selection here, and then I know, and then under the ear. Alright, so to start out with there, I'm going to start building up those tonal values. So as you can do it, and that's gonna that darkness, I probably wouldn't go that dark, but that darkness is going to really pop out your um, your tonal values, and it'll pop out your chin, and you can really build up. You don't have to go completely black right away. You can really build that up and get kind of that texture you want um, in your form. And to be honest with you, um, most of this stuff is, it's just about going over it a couple different times until you build up that form that you want. And that's really what a lot of this is about. And so I'm going to inverse this, and I'm going to kind of build up the undershadow or the under highlight here, and it's like so. And that's getting those subtle forms. Look at your gray value a little bit more, and getting those subtle forms is going to really give depth to your work. So you can use any brush you want. Brushes are irrelevant. I mean, if you want to paint with I've got a three pin brush here, and if you want to paint with something like that, that has brush strokes, I'm just going to do like an angle, skip the angle jitter, skip the roundness jitter, and if I want to start with a brush stroke like this, I'm just going to deselect. You can start painting like this and build up. It would actually help if I had you can actually paint like this and build up your strokes. You can also put on an angle jitter to initial direction, and that way it'll go up and down and crosshatch, and it basically becomes a series of crosshatches. And you can again build this up, and that doesn't matter what the brush is. It just matters that you're using that brush to build a pattern of light and darks within that color. So that's something that a lot of new artists always have. They always either stick with the round brush and get this airbrushy smooth look, which is fine, but you always want to be aware that that's what it's going to do. I only use the round brush when I'm starting to build up my form. It's a quick, easy way to really simply build up form, and then once in a while what I'll do is I'll switch to the hard brush, and I'm going to take off my shape dynamics, and I'm going to lower my spacing. Then I'll use the hard brush. So an example is I'm going to just take and select, and I'm just looking at your reference here. So I'm just going to take and select the breast, and it's going to here, and I would go a little bit thicker on the arm, and I'm just going to start like this. Okay, so on a smooth, on the soft setting, large, obnoxiously large size, what I would do instead is I would take this and start painting like so, and then if you want those darks in there, I'm going to paint the darks in like so, maybe even get just a hair darker. And as you can see, when I start doing this, the larger forms start popping in. This mid-tone gray, I'm going to kind of blend out like so, and I'm getting my base form in there. All right, and as you can see, just these light, really quickly brush strokes are going to give me form. Now notice this form flattening out here, and if you notice, I just did a tap here for a value check and a tap over here for a value check. So that means in the mid ground, I'm just going to grab that middle tone here and kind of do a center value, and it should start popping out just a hair. Now if it doesn't, I can always just go a little bit darker on one side and a little bit lighter on the other side, and it'll start flowing out. But that's what's going to get me my form, like so. And then from there, I switch to the hard size, and if I want the hard angle of the hard work of lines. So in this case, what I would do is put on the bra, which is a hard line, and that just by adding that little line there, it makes a huge difference. And then I would add, like the harder depth. Let me just grab a black color. So I'm going to add that hard depth of shadow, and you can build up the soft line. You just have to go over it a little bit more. And then from there, use the hard line to kind of build out that shoulder, or the what do you want to call it? It would be the kind of that little fold of skin there under the arm. And then again, using the black, you build up the form that you're missing for your darker section. Now you can go back to hardness. Now the problem with this again is it's going to be smooth and not necessarily the perfect solution. But by doing that, I can also choose a different brush. And like I said, I always choose I like the chalk brush. I know a lot of artists do, and I just am going to use the transfer and pose. And with the chalk brush, you can do the same thing, but it's going to give you a little bit more layered. And as you can see, and it's probably not going to translate well in the YouTube video, but as you can see, I'm going in the direction of that paint, and that's giving me a little bit of texture and a little bit of, I'm going to just deselect this, so it gives me a little bit of texture, and you can build that texture up to get a nice smooth gradient. It's just a matter of how you do it and what kind of process you're doing. And honestly, when I tell new users when they're starting out painting, get rid of 90% of your brushes. You can always get them back by literally just doing a going in the presets here and adding all these brushes in. And you can see I've got a ton of these brushes, but over the years, I've used a couple for this and that, but to be honest with you, a lot of these brushes I don't use at all. I use once in a while, or I'm looking for something special. I know some artists who just use the square brush, which is just a custom brush that they just took a square, filled it in, and just started building up their value and form and things like that, and they build it up, and they just go into that micro smoothing, and so they're just building that texture up while they do it, and it's just the way they do things. And I've always found that this works really good for blocking in stuff and then starting your values and stuff like that. But it again, it's personal preference. It's what you like. But as you grow as an artist, you'll start finding different brushes. Like this brush here, If you had a little bit more texture to it, I would go something like this, and I would actually put on my scattering, lower it down, and I would actually go in and add a little angle jitter so it's not the same, and then that's going to give you this speckled highlights, so you can add a little bit of flesh tone to your skin. To kind of smooth in that process and not have it um, so basic and so just a smooth form. And then you can even take some of the highlights and go back into the shadows so that when you do that, some of the bumps off the skin just kind of pop up, and it's just another brush. That's all it is. And I use it just for texture brush. And if you want your brush to be more fabric oriented, that's when I'd go back to something like this brush here, and I'd probably do less scatter, and I'd probably take my angle jitter off and start building up the flow of I'd start building up that flow of the way the skin goes. So I've got my angle jitter direction. So now if I want to do the pattern for fabric, and you want that pattern noticeable, and this is probably not the right brush to do it with, but in those lights and those highlights, you can start building that up and give it a little bit of texture. And of course I'm exaggerating this texture, but it still gives the point of difference between the original brush, and then I can go over here and kind of blend this in and give me a different texture for the central, a different part of the fabric. And I recommend just playing with your brushes, doing one painting with one brush until you feel comfortable with understanding how that brush works. And then don't feel like you have to stick with the exact same settings. I mean, I can take this brush and add a texture on it, and it becomes a lot smoother and less defined, and I can go and continue painting on it a little bit more. So again, what I recommend if you're worried about brushes is start from scratch. Go back to the basics and then just start building up what you're using. If you're comfortable with the circle hard and circle round, move on to the chalk brush. Move on to the heavy oil. It's just a different brush. Gives you a texture, and you build up your edges and do that sort of thing with your with your object. Now, just be wary that when you do textures, the problem with a texture is you can, this is a rock texture and this is the way this brush is built, but no matter what, that texture is always going to kind of be the same. You're never going to be able to fill in that hole very well. I mean, you can push harder, of course, and that texture is always going to stay the same. So you're going to find at some point, especially if you're using this for a large area, you're going to find that this brush has a repeating pattern on it. The dual brush is a little bit better for the less pattern texture and stuff like that, because it's just applying that brush to every stroke. So as you can see, you're going to get repeat strokes, which isn't necessarily great either. But when you go over it and build it up, it's going to kind of be a better process. So again, like I said, the brush for the most part, with the exception of, the shoulders, you did a pretty decent job. I know you had the big questions about the brush, and I hope this explanation helps you out a little bit. Um, and I guess that's pretty much it. Just, use your circle brushes for your form and maybe drawing and stuff like that, and then start building it up with the textures on everything else. All right, I hope that helps.